Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, may I ask you to switch off your mobile phones and to stand up for the academic procession. Good morning, Professor Bertolini. Welcome to Atrium B, this beautiful location in the heart of the recently renovated campus of the University of Antwerp, and also in the heart of our wonderful city as well. Welcome to the conferral of one of the honorary degrees for 20 and 23. My name is Anke, I'll be your hostess this morning, and it's an incredible pleasure to be surrounded by so much knowledge, intelligence, talent, and hard work. So let's make it a warm and interesting morning. Honorary Dr. Luca Bertolini will shortly be teaching a masterclass titled Planning Cities Beyond Mobility. During the masterclass, you can ask questions using the chat function on the YouTube channel. This is for the people online, of course. After the masterclass, there will be time for a Q&A session in which Professor Bertolini will answer the questions you submitted. Of course, the people here in the room can also participate in the Q&A session by using the very old-fashioned technique of raising your hand. Afterwards, we will proceed to the conferral of the honorary degree, of course. But first, I would like to give the floor to Professor Inge Bertels, Dean of the Faculty of Design Sciences, who will offer you all a very warm welcome.
Dear honorary guest, Professor Luca Bertolini, dear esteemed rector, Professor Herman van Goethem, dear Professor Thomas van Oetrieve and Professor Grete Blok, dear colleagues and guests here in situ at the Paardenmarkt, but also online. I have the great pleasure, but also the great honor to welcome you on behalf of the University of Antwerp and especially also on behalf of the Faculty of Design Sciences. Dear Professor Bertolini, it's a pleasure to welcome you here in Antwerp. And I'm also very happy that joint forces made it possible to organize this ceremony here in situ at one of our design campuses. This campus is only recently opened. It was closed for more than 4 years, and I think we're now here for 2 months. But the site and the project mean a lot to us. The city of Antwerp gave this historic, valuable, but run-down buildings on long lease to the University of Antwerp. And thanks to intelligent architectural, technical, as well as urban interventions, we now not only have a heritage gem, an inspiring design campus, but also a campus that stimulates the use of public transport, that welcomes bicycles and pedestrians, and that reconnects the campus with the urban context. As you already saw this morning, the neighborhood around the Paardenmarkt can definitely be labeled as a complex neighborhood. The site is literally at the edge of the historic 16th century district and received too little attention over the years. For instance, it became a shortcut for cars or car traffic wishing to avoid the busy boulevards and tunnels around the city. And also the great social diversity in the neighborhood and diverse activities from student housing over port logistics as well as social organizations for food distribution for the poor made that private investors made most of their actions behind closed doors. But this university project, this campus, really counters this. It opens the building block again and interweaves the university via public and semi-public spaces with the neighborhood, and it strengthens really the urban coherence. As such, the campus also reflects how urban neighborhoods and cities can benefit from qualitative interdisciplinary collaboration, how it can connect history and future on different urban scales, and demonstrates how research on usability and transport can make a difference to make better campuses for a better city. Developing urban visions, both sustainable and accessible, without less cars, is an endeavor that is also very high on your personal research agenda. And as such, I'm very grateful to have you here today with us, and I'm really looking forward to listen to your masterclass. Professor Luca Bertolini, I'm also very happy to give the floor to my colleague, Thomas van Oetrieve, who is chairman of the Program of Urban Design and Planning, to introduce you as well as your work. Thank you.
Dear Professor Bertolini, Director, Professor Mazzucato, Dean, and a warm welcome to all of you people interested in urban planning, mobility, and transport. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Bertolini from the University of Amsterdam, whose main academic contribution is situated in the context of transit-oriented development, or TOD. That's a strategy which entails that urban development should be concentrated near public transport hubs. In particular, books and articles by Professor Bertolini are often cited for the node-place model, which starts from the idea that the node value, what is present in the neighborhood, or how well a place is connected to other places, preferably using sustainable modes of transport, that there is a balance between this node value, the connectivity, and the place value, what is there in the vicinity of the node of the public transport hub. And so all the activities and services there, like offices, university buildings, event halls, well, these call for a good public transport supply, since it attracts many visitors, employees, and other people. So that increases the place value and also needs a high node value. On the other hand, it would also be inefficient, on the other side of the spectrum, to offer lots of public transport and to build a central railway station as we have in Antwerp, somewhere in a remote area with limited place value, so with a limited number of activities. What's also interesting is that he points to the concept of stress, that there might be too much of something, too much connectivity or too much activities at the location. It's also an interesting feature under research, to my view, of that model. And this offers a conceptual basis to plan and evaluate land use transport patterns. And the node-place model, it integrates nicely the aerial dimension of places, locations, neighborhoods with the transport dimension, the infrastructure dimension of connectivity and accessibility. And particularly interesting is the stress factor, but also that Professor Bertolini extends this conceptual model and the conceptual sphere and goes into practice and policy making, and also researches these topics. Also in the empirical work, the application, and this model that's easily applicable, which is really an added value both for theory and practice. He didn't just research about the model, also about how policy and models, ideas travel around the world. And in different contexts, take a different form or are repeated without taking into account the context. So that's also an interesting feature of the work, that it's not just about transport and land use, but also about the policy dimension, which is, for urban planners, of course, really interesting. Besides, I would also thank Professor Bertolini for his other work, which is also interesting. In particular, for instance, recent contributions about the difference for the role of streets. Is a street something for people to meet each other, or is a street an artery for traffic? So it's also really something we use in our work today, and we got some inspiration from you for that. So transport and land use is integrated at a higher scale, but also at the local scale of the street in his work. The influence of Professor Bertolini is visible in literally thousands of citations of his work in academic books and papers. Also here at the University of Antwerp, in the Research Group for Urban Development, I see Professor Koppes, Professor Van Acker, Professor Lauwers was also somewhere in the room, and all the other familiar faces, they refer to your work. Also at the Young Academic ISOP conference we have this week here in Antwerp, and thanks for your contribution over there in commenting the papers of the PhD students. I've seen several times references to your work, so it's still alive and kicking. It's not something of the past. Also in our Urban Studies Institute, and the co-director, Professor De Blok, is here as well. People know your work and build on it. And for instance, Seeing the City, the book you co-edited with Nanke Verloo, which is really a contribution to the methodology of urban studies, is valued. So also thank you for that contribution, which is a source of inspiration. And your influence in practice, some people here know the Flemish Association of Spatial Planners, the VRP, and they have a manifesto for mobility. And also there is the TOD, node place concepts are there. So also practitioners in urban planning value the work. Another indication of influence is student work. So our students, they write master theses, and I remember one particular master thesis. And I will explain why. The title was Bertolini 2.0. Well, when your name appears in the title of manuscripts, you know you have a lasting influence. So I guess it's now time to give the floor not to Bertolini 2.0, but to the original Bertolini 1.0, or perhaps 5.0, since you keep on reinventing yourself. So that's what we will see in the next 45 minutes. So, dear audience, now it's time for Professor Bertolini and his lecture, Planning Cities Beyond Mobility.
Okay, good morning, and don't be afraid, I will not talk about the no-place model. So if I say that word, leave the room, because it's a deal. What I will talk about is in this title, indeed, Planning Cities Beyond Mobility, with a question mark, and there's also the next 30 years. The next 30 years refers to a recent publication that took stock of 30 years of trying to make mobility sustainable, what sometimes is called the sustainable mobility paradigm. And the idea that I want to explore with you, and I'll be very happy if there are questions, if you don't agree, it's really an idea is that in the next 30 years we might make yet a step and explore the planning, the thinking of cities beyond mobility. So to go beyond that. And let's visualize the idea, the journey we are in. This is a street in English, in Amsterdam, the same street through the ages. Starting on the left, you see the street in the mid-19th century, and what to me is fascinating with this picture is, of course, there's no motorized transport, but it's more than that. There is transport, if you look well, but there are many more uses of the streets. There are people strolling around, there are people talking to each other. So it's a much varied range of uses and users. Now, then let's fast forward to the 80s. You might not be familiar with this kind of Amsterdam, but like many cities all over Europe and other places, you see the street taken over by cars. But again, it's not just cars, it's mobility, transport becomes the dominating function of the street. So it's also, channeling traffic becoming the hegemonic function of the street, not just one among many. Now, let's fast forward again to more or less today. That's how you would see the Darmstadt today. And the mobility, the transport is much more varied. You see some cars, buses, but you see vans, you see bicycles, you see pedestrians. But still, if you look well, you see that channeling flows, mobility is still quite very dominant. So which opens the question, okay, 30 years from now, how would that street look like? Try and dream. I had some ideas using some interactive things to let you literally express your thoughts. That's not possible, but still in your mind, try and envision what is your dream of a city street in a city you live, you love in 30 years. And the idea I want to explore with you is that to visualize that, to make some step in that direction, we should look beyond mobility, start somewhere else. And this is how I will explore this idea. So I will first start from the why, then move to the what, and with the how. So let's start with the why. And I would have asked you to think out of your mind what you see as challenges for contemporary urban mobility. And, I would have made a word cloud, and with all your thoughts, I do it sometimes, and something like that would have emerged. This is my word cloud. So the point here, and don't be afraid, I'm not going to discuss in detail each of these, is that there are a multiplicity of issues urban mobility is confronted now. So that's the first point. The second point is that there are three types of issues here. Now, first, there are issues like air and noise pollution, where you can think it's actually already the case. Transport technology, think at electric cars, electric vans, for instance, can solve this issue. Okay, that's fine. Category 2 issues here in orange are issues where, at least it is thinkable that technology, again, think electric, maybe self-driving, maybe shared cars could address this issue. But there is discussion. There's quite some discussion, electricity, will that be produced with renewable means? And how about batteries? Will it happen on time? Again, let's not enter this discussion. Self-driving cars, will they be that safe? Will they really solve congestions? Again, I don't want to enter this discussion, but let's see that it's thinkable that something might be solved, addressed by this sort of technologies. Now, the third category is what for me is really crucial, because these are issues, lack of physical movement, disrupt local communities, etc., etc. The issues, the red issues there, these are issues that transport technology cannot solve. Actually, it might even worsen them. If, suppose in a scenario where because technology helps us deal with some of the other issues, we'd stop, try and change the way people move, or those more mobility can happen, more traffic, and some of these issues might become even worse. So that's the why we need to think beyond mobility, is because this multiplicity of issues, and especially issues that in any scenario transport technology cannot solve. That is that is a key challenge. Of course, at the same time, we need to acknowledge that mobility has a key function in giving people, households, firms, access to essential resources, social contacts, jobs, services, etc., etc. So how can we deal with this sort of dilemma? And here we move to the what. And of course, there's a lot happening in cities, not only in the mind of professors. Actually, professors usually conceptualize things that start in practices that people try and do, cities and all the people in there. And I think there are 5 emerging building blocks of what cities beyond mobility could look like, cities that address those issues, which are, of course, problems, challenges, but also opportunities. At the same time, grant access to essential resources that people need. And while these things are all important and complementary to each other, they're often not seen as such. So my point here is not just highlighting each of them, but also stressing that it's only if we see them as something that happens together, that is combined, we can move in that direction I'm exploring with you today. And it's also important the order in which I discuss this issue. So we start indeed with streets. This idea that we hear everywhere in this time, it has also just been named by my colleague, by Thomas, streets for people, not for traffic. And reinterpreted, remember that first picture of the Darmstadt, to me means streets as multifunctional, diverse, rich public spaces, with traffic as one of the other functions, but other functions, children playing, people socializing, but also, nature, trees, animals, the streets as rich public and natural spaces. That is here the key idea, of course, with differences depending on the street. And it's here that then, starting from that idea, which is key to cities, that cities as a public space, as a place of mixture and interactions, that we see the problem with a car-dominated, van-dominated mobility, because that's an extremely inefficient way of using space. Depending on whether cars are moving or stationary, they are a factor 10 to 40 less efficient in the use of space than other transportation means. And that's why that picture of the cars taking over means literally the traffic function taking over all other multiple functions that street can have. But it's not just quantity, it's also quality. It's also the way of moving, a way of moving in a vehicle. That's why self-driving cars will make not much a difference in where the interaction between people and the surroundings, people and other people is, it's non-existent. You can even think that in a self-driving car, it could even become less than it is now, where at least you have to make some eye contact with people outside the car. In a self-driving car, you could totally be immersed in your electronic device and lose any contact with other users of the street, with the urban and natural environment. And you see this literally in experiments like this in Amsterdam and in other places, where temporarily the traffic function, including parking, is taken out and streets are open to other users. You see, life in all its richness exploding. I did a couple of years ago a review of studies that, interestingly, up to very recently, were almost only done in the public health literature. There was hardly any study of these sort of experiments in the transportation research or planning literature. Now they're slowly coming up, and I expect them to be booming in the next few years. And interestingly, is exactly those red issues that I showed in one of the first slides that are addressed here. It's not just more walking and cycling or physical activity. and those things that we might expect, but also things that are social interaction, sense of community, physical and mental health, appear to be positively influenced by this sort of changes. So this is the first and really crucial building block. You have to keep remember also when we move to other scale and transportation means and solutions that here is where the quality has to be sought. But of course, how to get access to those essential resources that people need, the firms need. That's the key function of mobility. Well, what if we stress another way, a complementary way of getting access in which not so much mobility but proximity, the distance to destinations, the availability of important resources in the surroundings where people live and work becomes the key way of assessing, which of course is not literally not moving, by stressing walking and cycling as a key way of moving. And why this way? Because that's really complementary, reinforcing of that idea of the street as a rich and diverse and inclusive public space. Of course, this idea popularized currently by concepts like the 50-minute city in Paris, which literally is this idea that from your home, within 15 minutes of cycling and walking, you could be able to reach the essential things of your everyday life. Now let's be a bit analytical, more analytical about what this means. And I always find fascinating that even in a city like Amsterdam, where you have cycling with such an important role, you see huge differences in the share of cycling in different districts. So let's compare, for instance, West and New West, and as you can see, there's also a double share of bicycles in West relative to New West, and the other way around if you look at the cars. So what's explaining, what's behind this? Well, it's not bike lanes, because bike lanes are basically there in the same quantity and quality in both West and New West. Of course, it could be an explanation, comparing Amsterdam with other cities which don't have bike infrastructure, but it's not an explanation in Amsterdam. Where you do see quite a striking difference if you go look at the function, at the land use. These are the non-residential land uses in West and New West. And here you see the difference. You see in West a big variety and fine-grained mix of all those destinations, those essential resources that can be accessible within those 550-minute walking and cycling. And you see that New West, it's less, it's much more concentrated. It's not the kind of fine-grained mixing that works very well with walking and cycling as the main way of accessing. What this also says, this map, that this is not just a transport project, it's also a social and economic project, which is, by the way, a very strong idea behind the 50-minute concept in Paris. Championed by the mayor there, Hidalgo. It's not, definitely, most of all, probably a social and economic project, not just transport or even just land use. So this is building block 2. But of course, it's not that everything can literally be accessible in this way. And of course, there are big diversity of needs, of people, firms. So sometimes you need to go further. And here, and only here, comes transit-oriented development in the picture. And indeed, the combination of public transport and urban development and the idea of that model, which I will not name today. And of course, there are in Europe iconic examples. One of the most striking in Europe is the city of Copenhagen, which has been pursuing this model since after World War II, and upscaling it as the city grew and developed at the same time public transport and concentration of development around the nodes. But there are two important differences. That's why I call it diffuse transport-oriented development. The first is that in this idea, it's a complementary approach to the two I just described. So it's not like something you need, I mean, not the average person should need to do every day. It's not like how Hong Kong, for instance, a city where I spent a few years ago, works on an everyday basis. It's what you have to do every once or in some specific situation when the richness of walking and cycling and mixed streets is not available. The second, and I'm working on a project with among more my colleagues here, is that this model up to now is really at a strong, what we call an urban bias. It's strongly focused on very urban kind of environment, in the sense of very dense, very diverse. So we have to find ways of making this model work also in much less dense and diverse environments, suburbs, the countryside, and similar. Let's quickly see how that can work. So this is the kind of traditional basic idea. So you have high capacity, high speed public transport, railway based, can also be bus based, and you concentrate development in high densities around the nodes. That's theory. Okay, but when you are in environments where, with lower densities, and maybe also with, landscape values, there might be valuable landscapes there, so you don't want to build in high density, or things are just there, and people don't want to give up their environments. Now, then it's here that where trip chaining or thinking at public transport, something which is not just something in itself, but that can be combined with other ways of moving around, which are not just other public transport, could be walking, could be cycling. Maybe that's a situation where a self-driving car could have a function in the future, maybe one of the few situations in which I can think that they can actually solve some problems and not create many more. This makes a much more flexible model, where you can also cope with lower density, for instance, and use it in a much more flexible way. And one, not the only, but one way where you really see the potential of this model is the combination of the bike and the train. The train is fast, high capacity, but not very flexible. The bike is very flexible, so the two together are really competitive with the car, which is fast and flexible. Now here you have a combination, this fits these ideas I'm exploring now, but it's competitive in terms of the accessibility it produces. Now, and in the Netherlands, you really see a life, which is, by the way, interesting because this model has never been planned. It just happened, emerged by people, realizing how well it can work. I mean, we even wrote an article claiming we should consider it a transport mode in itself, bike train. Certainly, you cannot understand the train system in the Netherlands without factoring the bike. 4 out of 10 people come to the station by bike. So if you take that out of the picture, you don't understand how this system works. But what about the car? Does the car have a role in this system? Well, it does, because there are situations where a car might be needed. I mean, there are people that might not be able to walk and cycle, might be able to take public transport. There are, all of us, anybody has situation carrying bulky goods, going to visit somebody living in the countryside or in some low-density environment. There are situations where the car might be needed. It might even be more sustainable. I mean, a car with a couple of persons in it is certainly more sustainable than an empty bus, driving around as we might see in some context. But the key point is that the car should be seen as a complementary option. So not, that's really the challenge, not as this hegemonic way of doing everything in any context for everybody that is now. So we have to make it one option among others. So the first thing to remember that the car industry and the high-tech industry try to make us forget all the time is that this is also a car. So even a self-driving electric car, in many ways, also if it is shared, which is a big if, is still not addressing a range of issues. Remember the red issues of one of the first slides. Again, if this would become the dominant way of moving around, even children, elderly people, anybody would start going around by this. Many of those issues, issues of physical, mental health, community, building, and so forth, will become even worse. But, as I said, if it is an option among others, as it is attempted by this idea of mobility as a service, which means let's see the car as one of other options where there are all the other options as well, and where there is some way helping you understand what are each time ways of moving around. You find a balance between your individual needs and the impacts you could have on society as a whole. So in that context, the car as an option, the car is certainly a function. But of course, it's a huge challenge to make that happen, because the forces, the historical forces which have made the car hegemonic are still there and very powerful, and forces that may be even more powerful, are even probably in our heads than are in practice. So that's definitely a challenge, and there have to be sticks because of the power of this path where we come from. And it could be congestion charging, as in Stockholm. It could be taking away parking places. It's difficult to think that that doesn't have a role. But again, of course, this is also meaningful when those alternatives are in places and where there is a discourse. And again, a discourse is not get out of car. The discourse is, are those rich and diverse streets, urban environments. I think highlighting those benefits appeals to many, if not all, people. Last but not least, freight. And freight is crucial as in the context of the multiplicity of challenges. And we have seen now with the explosion of home delivery in the last few years what that means. What means, means a situation like this, which of course are totally at odds with that diverse and use of streets. And the traditional way of addressing that is by improving the way goods are delivered, by making the use of vans more efficient, maybe making them electric, only more incidentally to shift to other ways of delivering freight. Think of cargo bikes and similar, and hardly avoiding. Really think, do we really need all those goods moving around? Shouldn't we really think at ways of making those flows less? Is repairing goods an options? Is recycling goods an option? Interesting, this is also an important component of the 50-minute city. So that's the traditional way of thinking, whereas the claim I'm making here, we should reverse that order, which is an approach you see in many other areas where sustainable development is a challenge, but definitely you don't see much in freight as yet. So you first really ask yourself, are there ways, what is really necessary of that flow, of all those flows? Are there ways of reducing those flows? And then you think, can we shift them to ways of transporting goods that are more compatible with the idea of city that I'm exploring, and really as a last resort, improve the way we are doing things now. Let's move to the how, and that's maybe where I don't know where I should have started here, but that's definitely a very important one, because the shift, or the pursuing the direction I'm pointing is definitely one where there will not only be winners, there will also be losers. At the very least, during the transition, there will be conflicts, there will be uncertainties. It's a very, so that I think it's a very political also kind of issue. It's not just, definitely not just that cannot be a technocratic dream or even the dream of a minority. So how to deal with that? How to change in the face of resistance to change, of conflict, uncertainty? I think this is really a crucial question, and one where maybe we have not reflected enough as planners and designers. And these are very complex issues, but to at least give here some pointers. The first is that history might help. This is a fascinating graph. For me, this is the share of bicycles in urban mobility in a number of cities in Europe. If you wonder about the numbers, in these numbers are only bicycle, public transport, and cars. So walking is not here. That's explaining those numbers. But still, the trends is here what counts. And what is fascinating is that you see very similar trends after World War II with mass motorization, suburbanization. You see a dramatic fall of car use all across Europe. But then you see let's first move here, two kinds of developments. You see around the 60s, 70s, some cities, including Amsterdam, but also others, you see a turnaround, what you call a paradigm shift, a transition, transformation, however you want to call it. So the trend reversed, and actually since then has kept growing. In other cities, that did not happen. Bicycles flattened out and stayed low. And I mean, it's not that I did this on purpose, but it's kind of interesting of comparing Amsterdam and Antwerp there, because they were both cities with a high share. So it's not just, low share, no shift, high share, high shift. Yes, shift. You see that even cities with comparable high shares like Antwerp could have different trajectory. And on the other hand, a city like Copenhagen right now claims, it's in a continuous competition with Amsterdam to claiming to be the bicycle cities, the capital of the world, had a lower share than, for instance, Antwerp. So what happened there? Now, first, again, it's not mobility. It's really different ideas of what a city are. So the city being pursued, this is Amsterdam as an example, before that shift, was really an idea of a city with offices and services concentrated in the center, housing in new neighborhoods outside the city, and fast transport, both highways for cars above the ground and the metro underground, connecting the two. So it was also an idea, functional separation, efficiency, etc., etc. It was an idea of a city here, and mobility being an ingredient there. And some of it has been built. But if you go down that same street, the Wieboudstraat, you go toward the center, actually in the plans of the planners, this should have looked like a bit like the first slide. And actually, if you go there today, you see something very, very different. Still, this is above the metro line. Everything had been demolished, so it could have been made in a very similar way to the Wieboudstraat. And instead, you see this. And again, it's not just mobility, it's a different idea of a city. It's a city with a high functional mix, again, fine-grained, the urban fabric has been maintained, so we are again in ideas similar where I started, and then not the car and the metro, but the bikes and the trams. So again, a way of moving around, which is really matching that fine-grained mixture of function and local life, and constraining car use in all way. Now, what explains what is in between here? It's definitely not planners or politicians waking up one day and say, my God, we should change direction, we did all wrong. Actually, they were really thinking that the first slide was the way to go. I mean, for all sort of good reason. Now, what happened was of a different sort. Part was really conflict in a very explicit way. This is a picture of the famous Newmarket riots of 1975, which actually are the most violent riots in the history of Amsterdam since World War II. So figure that the biggest riot in the history of Amsterdam since World War II are about cities, mobility, how we live, about our profession. Wow, that's how far it can be from technocracy as you want. And these fights were against the metro, but also for preserving houses in the center. So it was really, again, a lot of local people, but also young people, having their ideas about what a city was, what life was. So again, mobility was crucial, but it was part of a bigger project, a big idea. But it was not only violent conflicts. It was also exploring ways of moving forward, of changing, transforming the city. So what by now has become popular pictures, and we call experiments, some call them tactical urbanism, they might have been invented in Amsterdam and maybe other cities in the 70s. So there were cities, there were no bike lanes, they did not exist, and citizens started experimenting with bottom-up actions like this. And of course, these were triggers, and then of course there were there were professional politicians that became sensitive to this, and in the end, a change, of course, happened. But especially that idea of experimenting, I think it's a crucial one in answering that how question. So, we have an idea of the direction, but there are conflicts, there are uncertainties, which are not only about how to get there, but also where to get. And a particularly interesting concept here is that of transition experiment, something I borrow from the field of transition studies, which is an interesting field to look into when you look at these issues. And transition experiment, that's the definition they gave, are short-term actions through which alternative structures, cultures, and practices are explored. I mean, it's a lot of words, but the idea is quite simple. You try out something, in a bounded space and time. You try out how something could be. In political science, there is this nice word, prefiguration. And you do as if the world is as you dreamt. And the point is not that you can change it from one day or the other, but you can experience it. But also people. You can also understand maybe what problems that could generate. And in this sense, you can move forward. Now, a fascinating example comes from Belgium, the Leefstraat, the Living Street in Ghent, which are literally, closing streets to traffic and opening them to other uses, a multiplicity of uses I was talking about. At the same time, experimenting with alternative mobility options, shared bikes, cargo bikes, and the like, and to feed that back into the debate. Again, the key here, this is a very important thing, is not that from one day to the other you can change a city like that, but through these experiments, which are experiences, could also generate also debates, people like them, don't like them, you experience a possibility, but also you understand what you might have to do to get there. And then what it becomes crucial, and that's, I think, the key challenge here, is how to relate those short-term actions to the long term of policies and plans. And here is where you see that we still have work to do. This is a map where I overlaid the locations of the living streets in the years prior to the new transport plan, the circulation plan in Ghent. And you see there's hardly overlap, actually no overlap between the living streets and the car-free area. So there's no apparent direct relationship between the two. Of course, there could be all sorts of indirect relationship, maybe it's a level of discourse, which might be very important. But my last claim is that by making that link more direct, the link between the short-term, the experiments, the street, the practices, and the long-term of visions, network, institution, making the link more direct, making one feed into the other, I think that's a way, is my hypothesis, in which we could accelerate this transition better, finding ways to change in the face of resistance, of conflict, and uncertainties. So these are my propositions, and hopefully there are also some, could be trigger for some thoughts, for some questions. So that's where we should move next. Thank you very much.
For the resounding lecture on this resounding day. Time for questions. May I invite you to the table? Yeah. Yes?
Thank you, Professor Luca Bertolini. One of the people who was really inspired the past 20 years, let's say, by your theory, and I tried to make use of it, not only teaching, but also in practice as a consultant. But I have some questions about your vision for the future. Isn't it too optimistic? Especially referring to your building block number 2, probably you know that at this moment Professor Moreno receives life threats every day.
Yeah.
And that, for example, in Brussels, where a transition is made based on the Good Move plan, 3 municipalities can't gather anymore. Even democracy is under threat there by hate groups that are really disrupting the streets. They are really breaking all the interventions. They are disrupting municipality boards and so on. So maybe aren't we underestimating forces that go in another direction, hate groups and so on at this moment? Not only, let's say, what's living in the public, but really hate groups, organized counterattacks on after what happened with Dr. Fauci and COVID policies. Maybe our profession is under threat, and also maybe as in Ghent, as it happens in Ghent at this moment, as it happens in Brussels at this moment, this transition you are describing is coming maybe to an end. So I'm really challenging you maybe, but aren't you underestimating the conflicts and the car culture? And that's the question.
Yeah, I mean, that's the how question for me, that I said with big emphasis that it's very important. It's really related to what you're saying. Let me say, so it's a big question, but let's say two things. One, I really like you put us where you put other important professions, epidemiologists and other. So it means that it matters what we are doing, and think at the 70s, it was not pleasant in the 70s. We now all enjoy the bike lanes and the preserved city in Amsterdam, but I just read a PhD thesis of a colleague about those years. It was not, it was not only, pleasant, it was also fight. So that's part of it. At the same time, I'm not saying, oh, we should just kill each other and that's so nice, but I do think that the answer is that, again, one way is experiments, but I think we should go further, and that's a question we have to engage, finding a way of engaging with each other, which is definitely not only in our field, in many fields, and I think, and that's also maybe from a Dutch perspective, being also critical of the place I live in, and maybe also thinking on the last election. I think that our knowledge, our wisdom, our thinking that we know it is not going to work. Even if we have good ideas and well-founded, we have to find ways of having a dialogue with people that speak, not only have other interests, but speak another language, which cannot be convinced with models or laws. Again, in a situation which, because of social media and similar things, is totally polarized, we have to find ways of engaging. And I think that one way is, by doing things, experiencing things, together having a discussion about something which is not final, is temporary, can be the starting of such a thing. Again, let me, as a very last, cite the platform of this populist movement, which just got a big success in the Dutch election, and there are many people that, similar people that you're citing are in this. And of course, they have some things that you say, yeah, but what they want is absurd. But if you look at our platform, it was also about, being worried that supermarkets are closing in villages, that schools are closing in villages. So, or, having an emotional attachment to their profession, to their environment, maybe in a way that we say, but you are destroying the environment, but that's not how they feel. So I think that you see also signs where you can have a conversation, but then you have to find ways, citizen assemblies are one, in which different voices could be at the table and engage with each other. I think there's no other way. Because these conflicts are whether they are in the facts or in the minds, are real. And for us, is something we are really not used to do, and we have to learn, absolutely.
Other questions?
Yes.
Thank you for this inspiring analysis. Sometimes when I look at all these projects to the future, there is always one thing which strikes me. In fact, all these projects are working out new models using mobile devices. People are interconnected. Now we have an aging population everywhere in Europe, and a lot of people, not here, not at our universities, but in the real world, at the other side of the street where there is distribution on food every day, a lot of people, mainly poor people and older people, are not connected. Are you integrating in your projects enough these kind of people? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's an important point. In that sense, I mean, there could be two answers. One is, and there are some students, but of course I do exploring that, how can we make this technology more accessible to the elderly, which is, it's not an easy question, also because there's a reason because it's not. That's not where the profits are to be made, et cetera, et cetera. But from one part, and for me this is also an important ingredient here, the answer may be not technology. Again, things happening in a street. I mean, that street is very interesting because there is a place, an elderly house for elderly people, and I was there observing what was happening. And that was for the first time that these elderly people start having a chat with the neighbors in the street, where there were children playing out. So these are moments of physics. I mean, I think we cannot just do it with devices. We have to do it with our physical bodies. And I think that reclaiming streets as public spaces is crucial to democracy. Because it's not just having a chat with each other, could it be having a fight, being a place of political demonstration. I think that we cannot place that only on the web. It has a function, but we are much more than that. And I think that if we don't find places to meet as humans, including our bodies, and that's what streets also can be, we will never get through it. And I keep thinking also the other questions is, and we need places where concerns could be expressed. Again, it's not, these changes are not only about winning, they're also about losing. Again, that street I showed, it was also a situation where was a surprise when understood that there were some of these elderly people that were not visited anymore by their children living in the suburbs because they could not park easily anymore in the street. Very important to understand how do we deal with that. So many concerns, even the 15-minute city, not everybody can easily assess things within 15 minutes, and maybe not coincidentally, but a lot of these places already work this way, are not affordable. Houses prices are booming. So how can we? So we have to find situations. We are very aware that there are already losers. There could be finding ways to deal with this. And I'm not saying that the street is the only place, but I do think that it's not only in the metaverse that these things could be addressed.
More questions?
Yes.
Thank you, Professor Bertolini, for this very inspiring lecture. Just in response to also what you were just answering now, it made me think, so I believe in these city street experiments. I believe in face-to-face contact and what it does, and it helps to also take away some of the prejudices and the stereotypes that we have of other people, which is a very good way to start a dialogue. But does it also presume or necessitate some kind of sedentariness, some kind of that you live in that city?
Yep.
And what does that mean for things that instead where we have a lot of people who come and go from Airbnb apartments, but also to migration flows and refugees, or how our cities deal with refugees that host them in one place and then move them to another place. So how can you also incorporate this kind of mobility? Yeah,
that's a very interesting question. Indeed, because you could say, okay, well, are we reconstructing, closed communities, which is, are we making city neighborhoods sort of closed islands, villages, which is totally against the whole idea of the city, which is about these different people, including transit population, coming and going. So I think that the idea here, and maybe we have to think of different ways of movement which are slower, where migrants but also tourists take time to engage with the community, but in which also maybe we could all become nomads as long as we spend enough time in a place to engage with people. So it doesn't mean not moving, but it does mean, well, one, moving in ways which expose us to others, to the environment, and maybe also taking time to engage with others and the environment. Of course, points to changes which are also fundamental in the society, in the common. These things are connected. And again, I think that the important thing is to try that out, start, even though we don't exactly know where we will end or where or how we will get there. Yes.
Thanks, Luca, for a really inspiring talk. I want to maybe on building block number 5 in terms of freight. We know that there is a very strong link between transport mobility and the economy.
Yeah.
So in that sense, if we are pushing towards more avoidance, could it also lead to maybe decline in economy, decline in wealth, decline in, let's say, also the growth of cities? So instead of advocating a growth culture, could it be that we are advocating a decline culture?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, I wouldn't use the word decline. Others would use, for instance, the word degrowth or post-growth. But indeed, I do think that many of these arguments are connected to a broader discussion about the economy, which is about seeing the economy, and certainly growth, not as an end, but as a means. So, and again, questioning whether in rich societies ours, if growth makes sense at all. There's enough studies showing that we are well beyond let's say the size of the economy of the growth level that we need to be happy, which is not the case in many other countries in the world. So we be very cautious not to say something in a generic way. That there are places that still need to grow economically, but there are others where we should question that. And I mean, and many are trying to put the emphasis on other indicators, other goals, well-being, equality, etc., and then see the economy as a means to that end. And again, there's mounting evidence that growth in many countries might not be needed if we see the economy in that way. But you're right to point at the connection. These things are not independent of each other. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Bertolini, for your clear presentation. And I was very much inspired by your first question. What is the street of the future looks like? And I started dreaming. I started to dream of a very green, luscious street where my children could play freely and I could organize spontaneously a picnic with my neighbors. But I have to admit, with every building block you added, this image started to crumble a little bit more. Because with every building block came, in my interpretation as an urban designer, a wish list for additional space for sidewalks where we can meet our neighbors and joining conviviality, as you call it, a proper wide bicycle path to stimulate building block 2 and 3, some parking space for a car as our companion or complementary companion, as you call it. Maybe some parking spots for the delivery trucks, as you call it. But I started panicking because our colleagues at the public domain, the public administration, they also have their wish list. They ask us as urban designers to integrate space for utilities, facilities, even integrate the future heat network. And their colleagues at the Department of Environment and Green, they ask us to integrate more trees to combat the urban heat island effect, leave room for water and more impermeable streets. So that becomes a quite extensive wish list, if you understand me. How will we ever be able to fit those 5 building blocks in Antwerp, for example, where 80% of the streets are labeled very small street canyons, as we call it?
I think you give me a chance to clarify, because if that's what you got, I wasn't able to express, because I would say really the opposite, because I totally want to start where you had the energy, because that's where I want to stay. And actually, what I was doing was not adding, was subtracting. Let's start with, of course, in this vision, if you follow it, the car is really an option. So it means, if you want numbers, a radical decrease in the amount of parking space, the amount of cars driving around, which is a huge space. There's a 10 to 40 time more efficient ways of moving around. So wherever I had this talk, if you take the cars out, you can do whatever you want in the streets. You know, think of the streets of the mid-19th century in the first picture. That's first. And again, also when I introduced TOD, I said there's a key difference with Hong Kong. This is complementary. You have to think as something much more lighter that most people don't need to use every day. So it's a different sort of volume. And the car, they say, so there's a lot less making space for all those other functions. And then we get, I heard you say this and that. Again, for me, the fascinating image of the 19th century is that there were no sidewalks. There was a very undifferentiated street space where all these different, in a very organic way, you know, like in a primordial forest, different functions where with also some self-organizing, actually a lot. There were no signage, traffic lights, rules. But because, you know, it was slow, it was human adapting to each other, all those things could have, so my vision, of course, rethought in a way, is something like that, where you basically need two things. Less flows, I would say, less machines or clumsy objects, and also less speed. Speed is, I should have emphasized that you need a speed that is compatible with the reaction speed of human beings, bodies, not machines. So, and there are cities that are already showing it. I think Barcelona is a very good example of a city that in many areas, it's very interesting, because what they did there, it's not, banning all traffic, some local traffic, emergency, but you have 10 kilometers per hour speed limits. And I've been walking there, and every once there is a machine coming by, but there is this self-organizing that you saw in the street of the 19th century. So that's my vision, and the rest is acknowledging that we need access, but in these other ways. Ending with freight, would I also say, we should start with avoid. So again, it's reducing flows, making them lighter, making them slow, so that again, as it was for thousands of years, we can exploit our self-organizing capability as human beings. But I should have been clearer.
May I add another layer of complexity to all this? So, and it ties also in with comments on populism and also migration. So what about less dense areas? What about rural areas where these are often the battlegrounds of these populist areas? Also often places where migrants are exposed to. Is there, can we imagine there livable streets with these kinds of problems, also with different cultures?
It's very good question. First, I said it, you are leading a project to that. I do think that there is a challenge of imagining models that now are really biased towards the urban, the high density, and so rethink these things in these other contexts. But I don't think that the principles are not true there. Let me use my own experience. My family comes from a village in the Alps, and I spend there a couple of weeks every summer. And some of my fondest childhood memories are of us as children, playing freely in the streets of the village. We're coming back. People have migrated, come back in the summer until dark. So that was. You go there now, it's just cars everywhere, children nowhere to be seen. Well, I think that the latent desire of children there to do that is there. So you can build on that. And going then to the other building block, another example, the 50-minute city idea, you say, well, this place functions now sort of Los Angeles, everybody has a car. But after a lot of discussions, the local government decided to subsidize a shop that was about to be closed not 100%, but in important measure because they realized that this was also a social place, especially for elderly people that didn't have a car, couldn't have their kids driving them around. They would go there. The shopkeeper owner has it chats with people. We know that loneliness, a lack of social contact, is the #1 reason of mental and physical health. So these understandings start to grow. So keeping the shop there, having people walk to the shop. So I think, and we could go on and on. I think that if we understand these needs, desire, possibilities, they're everywhere. But we have to find ways of building on them in a different context. Of course, this village I come from is no place for heavy rail or high rise, but there is place for walking, cycling, some light form of public transport, maybe sharing cars, people helping it, other more, but the principle, the desire, the needs are there to be built on as well.
Professor Bertolini, thank you for your lecture. Every so many times you have a student doing a master thesis on a self-driving car. And then in the middle of the academic year, I like to shock them by saying that self-driving cars already existed when I was born in 1966, and it's called a taxi. Mm-hmm. Now my question, do you foresee in 2066 that we will have more or less taxis? Whether they are driven by a human or by a computer, for that matter, is irrelevant. And I do see that today, taxis are in fact, as a mode, heavily taxed and suppressed, in fact, compared to other modes. But I then will give a second answer. If I really, honestly, I'm really, it's a very good question, but I'm not really interested, because I think that's not the discussion we should have. Again, the discussion should be about the city we want, about the society we want, the way of living together we want. And then ask, is this emerging technology going to help us? Is it going to be making things worse? And I think this attitude to technology would do us much good in any field. We are in a world where there are powerful interests selling us technology as something that's going to happen, that we have to deal with. I mean, the discourse of the self-driving cars was, for a long time, it's happening, cities have to adapt. And then somebody started to say, wait a minute, cities have to adapt? Maybe the self-driving cars adapt to cities, not the other way around. And maybe the self-driving car is not going to help cities, so maybe we should not want the self-driving car. So again, that's anyway, I think, without concluding the argument, that's a much healthier way of dealing with that. If you then ask me, and again, this is also an hypothesis that could be, changed while experimenting, debating, but in this vision, I think, to be honest, I see in dense and diverse urban environment a very marginal role for self-driving, maybe comparing with taxis. Again, there are situations, somebody who cannot, I've been taught one of these experiments and one person being against, and then being discovered, it was a taxi driver, but he was also taking the old people of the street to the hospital. Okay, so that, that's something maybe that, this possibility has to be there. And if in the future it is a self-driving car, okay, but then I wonder, but that elderly person, would be he be happier with a self-driving car or with a taxi driver that have a chat, is a human being, they can talk about what's happening, not happening. Again, remember, it's counterintuitive, but it really, I read recently, coming from research, that the major factors in affecting our physical and mental health are 1, loneliness, and 2, lack of social contact. Are we going to give that up by putting machines in between us? In a way, we are really crazy if we go in that direction. If you are, at the same time, again, there might be situation. The other one I show, maybe in the countryside, you know, as a feeder of public transport, of an alternative for people that cannot move around. That could be an option. But even there, I wonder, would we rather have a neighbor giving us a lift to the hospital instead of a machine? I don't know. It's just a question I ask. And maybe the most important thing is asking those questions, having those conversations, being very open that technology, of course, could also be of help. I'm not saying we should be, but we should see it as a means, not an end, and as something that we can also have an opinion about. It's not happening, it's not coming, it's not God. It's other humans that have these ideas and we might not agree and have other ideas.
Thank you. I think we have to end this session. Thank you so much, Professor Bertolini. I think the final answer really kind of wraps it all together. It's about seeing and imagining the city, and about asking questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And now what happens with that going?
Yes, you can take your seat again. Thank you so much, Professor Bertolini, for the inspiring masterclass. It is now time for the official moment. It is now time to confer the honorary degree on Professor Luca Bertolini. Nominator Professor Thomas van Oetrieve will deliver the laudation before the official conferral, and afterwards the honorary doctor gives his own words of thanks.
Thanks for your lecture. It was a wonderful masterclass, and I will now summarize the reasons why we invited you. First, there is the intellectual legacy, which materializes in books, publications, citations. We also already referred to that. Second, there is you as a source of inspiration. That's what you did in the masterclass. You were on the stage, brought inspiration to us, also challenged people with their questions and your answers. So you're a source of inspiration for both practitioners as well as researchers. But there's a third reason. And the third reason I want to emphasize, since that's less visible here today, it's your attitude, your stance towards other researchers and especially young researchers. They come to you at conferences, but we also send a spy to Amsterdam to you might have noticed her presence there. And well, researchers, especially young researchers, they are brave, they have new ideas, they challenge you, they critique your work, they come with approaches like artistic research, and yeah, so it seems at first sight that something out of your domain, out of your expertise. And what you do is you do not go to the defensive mode. No, it's like, oh, interesting. That's your first reaction. So the open mind, the curiosity. And the researchers, they get something back. You point them to sources, which I thought you would never have read, but you know them. It's like, read this, it will be useful for you. And it is the case. So that's something I want to emphasize. that the open-mindedness, the curiosity, and that also after, well, already quite some years of research, is still that the new ideas inspire you, you keep on thinking and developing, so that's also an important reason. For these reasons, I request that the rector honor Professor Luca Bertolini with an honorary degree from the Faculty of Design Sciences of the University of Antwerp.
Dear attendees, on the recommendation of the Faculty of Design Sciences and by decision of the Executive Board, the University of Antwerp confers upon Professor Luca Bertolini, Professor of Urban Planning, University of Amsterdam, the degree of Doctor Honoris Causa in Design Sciences for his outstanding work on the integration of land use and transport planning and policy. Congratulations, and hereby I confer you in a very official way.
Thank you very much.
The special medal of the university and also
a
new diploma. Congratulations. Thank you very much.
I said I had 1 minute. So I have 3 things to say very quickly. One, that maybe the first is that for me this is not, of course, it's for me, but it's most of all for the ideas, you know, for what I share with you, including the discussion, ideas evolving. So that, you know, the striving that I think puts together all the people in the room and many more to make cities human places. The second is that, again, it's for me, but ideally should be here in the back at least 100 names of other people and many more, because whatever anybody could think, and every once we get individual rewards, but science, but also planning, the profession, these are collaborative endeavors. I mean, we are nothing without others. Of course, each of us has a role, but it's in the interconnections, working together, debating with each other, which brings us forward. So, and literally, look at least at my co-authors and many more, hundreds of names. And the last, because the minute was already passed, just you know, I'm happy. I thank you for, you know, to have made that step and decided to you know, and invited me for these things. That's as simple as that. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the nice words.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a photo shoot. You need to be there for the photo. Okay, and now I have to be there too. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
You sit or not?
And after this photo moment, I would like to finish this morning by saying a few words of thanks myself. Thank you again very much to Professor Luca Bertolini, not only for the incredible work you are doing, for the extremely interesting masterclass, but also for accepting this honorary degree. And next to every successful man is a strong woman, or another man, but in this case it's a woman. So many thanks to Professor Valentina Mazzucato, also for joining our ceremony this morning, and we have a small but very delicious and typical Antwerp present for you. Thank you, of course, to Rector Herman van Goetem, to Dean Inge Bertels, and to nominator Thomas van Utrieve. Thank you to the Faculty of Design Sciences and the University of Antwerp. And finally, of course, I'd also like to thank you for being here, for watching online, and I hope to see you again in 2024.
Thank you.